So everyone, what we're talking about is the failing of SVB Bank and the government stepping in. So the question, my man here says, to just you tell folks what you said.
So I asked the question that, everyone likes to, in an emergency, pay attention to the shark that's right next to the boat.
Because that's one could get me. I figured that's one that's going to get me.
That's SVB. And it's largely been handled by the Fed. They guaranteed everyone's deposits, and they're working through that. But there might be a bigger shark just a few feet away, and that's when this week Credit Suisse, large investment bank, was bailed out by their government, $54 billion loan, emergency loan.
Okay, real quickly, let me stop you there. So when the government stepped in for SVB, do you think that quieted the masses?
I think temporarily, but something else happened this week that was interesting. There's a facility called the Fed discount window, which is like an emergency backstop for banks to borrow on a short-term basis for liquidity. In a normal week, so 2 weeks ago, the collective U.S. banking system borrowed about $5 billion. At the height of the financial crisis, the banking system in 1 week borrowed $111 billion. This week, banks around the country borrowed over $160 billion. So on one hand, we're hearing that it was just Silicon Valley Bank and we're fine, but the actions of the banking community, they've been borrowing a lot of money, shoring up reserves this very week. And you can look at that two different ways. That's great. Maybe the Fed encouraged them to do that so that they're guaranteed to be safe.
Okay.
Or maybe they're worried a little bit.
All righty. So you made your point. There happened to be a banker in the room. The banker jumped up and said, folks, nothing to see here. This cannot happen in Virginia. And explain to the listeners why he said it couldn't happen in Virginia.
Well, they focused on that Silicon Valley Bank was lending to startups and maybe had a little bit of a higher risk tolerance and there's been other articles, other Virginia banks talked about they're not a traditional lender, Silicon Valley Bank. And that's fine, but remember, they're focusing on the shark right next to the boat. Credit Suisse is a global investment bank that failed. So I feel that we should stop focusing on SVB and start looking at the rest of the system and having honest conversations around what's really out there.
Because I'm normally not a conspiracy theorist. I normally don't traffic in that world. But we've seen this before. We saw this with COVID, where one day we hear a little something, nothing to see here. It's going to pass in a couple weeks. Hence, it changed the world.
I definitely don't think that's what's happening.
Okay, so you're walking me back off the ledge because I can get kind of nervous.
No, it's not that. I mean, they're doing everything they can to make sure this doesn't spiral, right? The Fed, the regulators, the Treasury, everyone, they've done a great job. But if you think 3 chess moves ahead, what does this mean? Your deposits are safe because the Fed has guaranteed them. But what does this mean for your business? It probably means if we do have a hard recession, a hard landing, that your access to credit, those banks lending to you, will probably be pulled back. So yeah, your deposits are safe, your bank's probably not going to close, but it might be difficult to run your business going forward. And if we have that recession, there should be opportunities where maybe you could buy a competitor, maybe you could buy a supplier and be vertically integrated. Maybe there's another product you could add to your company, and you need a war chest to do that. Now's the time to assemble it. So there is no conspiracy to worry about, but I would think it's a great time to call your banker and ask, how are things and what's going on?
And they're going to say,
everything's fine, it can't happen here.
And you say you have one question after that.
That's when you ask them to increase your credit facility and just see how that conversation goes, right? And see if and then it might be time to get another banker, have another relationship